Brownies by Z.Z. Packer. By our second day at Camp Crescendo, the girls in my Brownie troop had decided to kick the butts of each and every girl in Brownie Troop 909. Troop 909 was doomed from the very first day of camp. They were white girls. Their complexions were a blend of ice cream, strawberry, and vanilla. They turtled out of their buses in pairs, their rolled-up sleeping bags covered with Disney characters, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Mickey Mouse, or the generic cheap ones parents bought. Washed-out rainbows, unicorns, curly-eyelashed frogs. Some clutched igloo coolers, and still others held onto stuffed toys like pacifiers, looking all around them like tourists, determined to be dazzled. Our troop was wending its way past their bus, past the ranger station, past the colorful trail guide drawn like a treasure map, locked behind glass. "Man, did you smell them?" Arnetta said, giving the girls a slow once-over. "They smell like chihuahuas. Wet chihuahuas." Their troop was still at the entrance, and though we had passed them by yards, Arnetta raised her nose to the air and grimaced. Arnetta said this very from the rear of the line, far away from Mrs. Margolin, who always strung our troop behind her like a string of obedient ducklings. Miss Margolin even looked like a mother duck. She had hair cropped close to a small ball of a head, almost no neck, and huge miraculous breasts. She wore enormous belts that looked like the kind weightlifters wear, except hers were cheap metallic gold or rabbit fur or covered with gigantic fake sunflowers, and often these belts would become nature lessons in and of themselves. "See," Miss Margolin once said to us, pointing to her belt, "this one's made entirely from the feathers of baby pigeons." The belt layered with feathers was uncanny enough, but I was more disturbed by the realization that I had never actually seen a baby pigeon. I searched weeks for one, in vain, scampering after pigeons whenever I was downtown with my father. But nature lessons were not Miss Margolin's top priority. She saw the position as troop leader as an evangelical post. Back at the AME church where our Brownie meetings were held, Mrs. Margolin was especially fond of imparting religious aphorisms by means of acrostics. Satan was serpent always tempting and noisome. She referred to the Bible as basic instructions before leaving Earth. Whenever she quizzed us on these, expecting to hear the acrostics parroted back to her, only Arnetta's correct replies soared over our vague mumblings. "Jesus," Miss Margolin might ask unexpectedly, and Arnetta alone would dutifully answer, "Javia's example saving us sinners." Arnetta always made a point of listening to Mrs. Margolin's religious talk and giving her back what she wanted to hear. Because of this, Arnetta could have blared through a microphone that the white girls of Troop 909 were wet chihuahuas without so much of a blink from Mrs. Margolin. Once Arnetta killed the troop goldfish by feeding it to a French fry covered in ketchup, and when Miss Margolin demanded that she explain what had happened, she claimed that the goldfish had been eyeing her meal for hours. Then the fish, giving into temptation, had leapt up and snatched a whole golden fry from her fingertips. "Serious chihuahua," Octavia added, and though neither Arnetta nor Octavia could spell chihuahua, had ever seen a chihuahua, trisyllabic words had gained a sort of exorcism within our fourth grade seat at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. Arnetta and Octavia would flip through the dictionary, determined to work the vulgar-sounding ones, like debutee and asinine, into conversation. "Caucasian chihuahuas," Arnetta said. They did it. The girls in my troop turned elastic. Dreama and Eloise doubled up on each other like intricately intertwined kites. Octavia slapped her belly. Janice jumped straight into the air, then did it again as if to slam dunk her own head. They could not stop laughing. No one had laughed so hard since a boy named Martez had stuck a pencil in the electric socket and spent the whole day with a strange grin on his face. "Girls, girls," said our parent helper, Mrs. Hetty. Mrs. Hetty was Octavia's mother, and she waved her finger perfunctorily like a windshield wiper. "Stop it, now, be good." She said this long enough to be heard, but lazily, bereft of any feeling or indication that she meant to be obeyed, as though she would say these words again at the exact same pitch if a button somewhere on her were pressed. But the rest of the girls didn't stop. They only laughed harder. It was the word Caucasian that got them all going. One day, at school, about a month before the Brownie camping trip, Arnetta turned to a boy wearing impossibly high ankle floodwater jeans and said, "What are you, Caucasian?" The word took off from there, and soon everything was Caucasian. If you ate too fast, you ate like a Caucasian. If you ate too slow, you ate like a Caucasian. The biggest feat anyone at Woodrow Wilson could do was jump off the swing in midair at the highest point in its arc, and if you fell, as I had more than once, instead of landing on your feet, knees bent, Olympic gymnast style, Arnetta and Octavia were prepared to comment. They'd look at each other with the silence of passerbyers who'd narrowly escaped an accident, then nod their heads, whispering with solemn horror, "Caucasian." Even the only white kid in our school, Dennis, got in on the Caucasian act. That time when Martez stuck a pencil in the socket, Dennis had pointed and yelled, "That was so Caucasian." When you lived in the south suburbs of Atlanta, it was easy to forget about whites. Whites were like those baby pigeons. They're real and existing, but rarely seen or thought about. Everyone had been to Rich's to go to clothes shopping. Everyone had seen white girls and their mothers cuckooing over dresses. Everyone had gone to the downtown library and seen white businessmen swish by importantly, wrist fixed in front of them to check the time as though they would change from Clark Kent into Superman at any second. But those images were fleeting as cards shuffled in a deck, whereas the 10 white girls behind us, invaders, Arnetta would call them later, were instantly real and memorable with their long shampoo commercial hair, straight as spaghetti from the box. This alone was reason for envy and hatred. The only black girl most of us had ever seen with hair that long was Octavia, whose hair hung past her butt like a Hawaiian hula dancer's. The sight of Octavia's mane prompted the other girls to listen to her, as though whatever she had to say would somehow activate their own hair follicles. For example, when on the first day of camp, Octavia made as to speak, and everyone fell silent. "Nobody," Octavia said, "calls us the N-word." At the end of the first day, when half of our troop made their way back to the cabin after tag team restroom visits, Arnetta said she'd heard one of the Troop 909 girls call Daphne the N-word. The other half of the girls and I were helping Mrs. Margolin clean up pots and pans from the campfire ravioli dinner. When we made our ways to the restroom to wash up and brush our teeth, we met up with Arnetta midway. "Man, I completely heard the girl," Arnetta reported. "Right, Daphne?" Daphne hardly ever spoke, but when she did, her voice was petite and tinkly, the voice one might expect from a shiny new earring. She'd written a poem once for Langston Hughes Day, a poem brimming with the teacher-winning ingredients, trees and oceans, sunsets and moons. But what cinched the poem for the grown-ups, snatching the wind from Octavia's musical ode to Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, were Daphne's last lines. "You are my father, the veteran. When you cry in the dark, it rains and rains and rains in my heart." She'd always worn clean, though faded, jumpers and dresses when chic jeans were the fashion. But when she went up to the Dales to receive her prize journal, pages trimmed in gold, she wore a new dress with a velveteen bodice and taffeta skirt as wide as an umbrella. All the kids clapped, though none of them understood the poem. I'd read encyclopedias the way others read comics, and I didn't get it. But those last lines pricked me. They were so eerie, and as my father and I ate cereal, I'd whisper over my Fruit Loops like a mantra, "You are my father, the veteran. You are my father, The veteran, the veteran, the veteran, until my father, who acted in plays as Caliban and Othello and was not a veteran, marched up to my teacher one morning and said, "Can you tell me what's wrong with this kid?" I thought Daphne and I were friends, but I think she grew spooked by me whispering those lines to her, begging her to tell me what they meant. And I soon understood that two quiet people like us were better off quiet alone. "Daphne, didn't you hear them call you the N-word?" Arnett asked, giving Daphne a nudge. The sun was setting behind the trees, and their leafy tops formed a canopy of black lace for the flame of the sun to pass through. Daphne shrugged her shoulders at first, then slowly nodded her head when Arnetta gave her a hard look. 20 minutes later, when my restroom group returned to the cabin, Arnetta was still talking about Troop 909. My restroom group had passed by some of the 909 girls. For the most part, they deferred to us, waving us into the restroom, letting us go even though they'd gotten there first. We'd seen them, but from afar, never within their orbit enough to see whether their faces were the way all the white girls appeared on TV, ponytailed and full of energy, bubbling over with love and money. All I could see was some of them rapidly fanned their faces with their hands, as though the heat of the day had long passed. A few seemed to be lolling their head in slow circles, half purposely, as if exercising the muscles of their neck, half ecstatically, like Stevie Wonder. "We can't let them get away with that," Arnetta said, dropping her voice to a whisper, to a laryngetic whisper. "We can't let them get away with calling us the N-word. I say we teach them a lesson." She sat down cross-legged on a sleeping bag, an embittered Buddha, eyes glimmering acrylic black. "We can't go telling Miss Margolin either. Mrs. Margolin'll say something about doing unto others and the path of righteousness and all. Forget that S." She let her eyes flutter irreverently until they half closed, as though ignoring an insult wasn't worth returning. We could all hear Miss Margolin outside, gathering the last of the metal campware. Nobody said anything for a while. Usually people were quiet after Arnetta spoke. Her tone had an unbolstered confidence that was somehow both regal and vulgar at once. It demanded a few moments of silence in its wake, like the ringing of a church bell or the playing of taps. Sometimes Octavia would ditto or dissent to whatever Arnetta had said, and this was the signal that others could speak. But this time, Octavia just twirled a long cord of her hair into pretzel shapes. "Well?" Arnetta said. She looked as though she discerned the heavy severity of the situation and was waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Everyone looked from Arnetta to Daphne. It was, after all, Daphne who had supposedly been called the name, but Daphne sat on the bare cabin floor, flipping through one of the Girl Scout handbooks, eyebrows arched in mock wonder, as if the handbook were a catalog full of bright and startling foreign costumes. Janice broke the silence. She clapped her hands to broach her idea of a plan. "They gon' be sleeping," she whispered conspiratedly. "Then we sneak into they cabin, and we'll put Daddy Longlegs in their sleeping bags. Then they'll wake up. Then we're gonna beat 'em till they're as flat as frying pans." She jammed her fist into the palm of her hand, then made a sizzling sound. Janice's country accent was laughable, her looks homely, her jumpy acrobatics embarrassing to behold. Arnetta and Octavia volleyed amused, arrogant smiles whenever Janice opened her mouth, but Janice never caught the hint, spoke whenever she wanted, and fluttered around Arnetta and Octavia, futilely offering her opinions to their departing backs. Whenever Arnetta and Octavia shooed her away, Janice loitered until the two girls would finally sigh and ask, "What is it, Miss Caucasoid? What do you want?" "Shut up, Janice," Octavia said, letting a finger-looped loop of hair fall to her waist as though the sound of Janice's voice had ruined the fun of her hair twisting. Janice obeyed. Her mouth hung open in a loose grin, unflappable, unhurt. "All right," Arnetta said, standing up. "We're going to have a secret meeting and talk about what we're going to do." Everyone gravely nodded their head. The word secret had a built-in importance. The modifier form of the word carried more clout than the noun. A secret meant nothing. It was like gossip, just a bit of unpleasant knowledge about someone who happened to be someone other than yourself. A secret meeting or a secret club was entirely different. That was when Arnetta turned to me as though she knew she was doing was both a compliment and a charity. Snot, you're not going to be a bee and tell Mrs. Margolin, are you? I have been called Snot ever since first grade, when I'd sneezed in class and 2 long ropes of mucus had splattered a nearby girl. Hey, I said, maybe you didn't hear them right. I mean, are you going to tell on us or not? Was all Arnetta wanted to know. And by the time the question was out, the rest of the Brownie troop looked at me as though they'd already decided their course of action, me being the only impediment.